cremated my husband on a Tuesday, and by Thursday his attorney called to tell me about the cabin. Not just any cabin, a property in the mountains of western Montana that my husband had owned for 11 years, 4 years before we even met, and never once mentioned. The attorney, a dry-voiced man named Mr. Calloway, read it off like a line item in a grocery list. Pinewood Ridge property, Flathead County, Montana. Transferred in full to Sasha Vance, née Sasha Merrill. I sat in the kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear and a half-empty cup of coffee going cold in front of me. And I said, "I'm sorry, what?" He repeated it, same flat tone. My husband's name was Joel Vance. We were married for 9 years. He was a structural engineer who traveled for work, overseas contracts, pipeline inspections, weeks at a time in places I could barely find on a map. I never questioned the travel because he had always traveled. It was just Joel. That was just how we worked. But I'd never heard the word Montana come out of his mouth. Not once. Mr. Calloway told me the property taxes were paid through the next 3 years. He told me there was a caretaker, a man named Gil Dorsey, who had been maintaining the cabin since Joel acquired it. He told me Joel had left a letter inside the cabin itself, in an envelope taped to the inside cover of a blue journal on the desk. He told me I would need to go there before making any decisions. After I hung up, I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. My sister-in-law, Noelle, Joel's younger sister, called me that same evening. She had a way of calling that felt less like reaching out and more like checking in on an investment. "I heard from Calloway," she said, "about the Montana property." "How?" I asked. The will reading hadn't even happened yet. She paused just long enough to make the pause noticeable. "He mentioned it. I just want you to know I'm here for you, Sasha." Something like this. Finding out about a whole property you didn't know existed. That's a lot to process alone. I'd love to help you figure out what to do with it. I haven't decided anything yet. "Of course not," she said. "But when you're ready, you know I have connections in real estate. Mountain properties are moving right now. You could walk away with real money. Enough to start over." I told her I'd think about it. I didn't tell her I'd already looked up the address and that my hands were shaking while I typed it. The flight to Kalispell was 4 hours from Chicago. I booked it the next morning for the following week, 2 days after the formal will reading. Noelle texted me twice during the booking process, once asking if I wanted company on the trip, once sending an unsolicited estimate from a real estate contact. I read both messages and didn't answer either one. The will reading was brief. Joel had been precise about everything, the way he was precise about blueprints and load calculations. The house in Naperville went to me. His truck went to his college roommate. His tools went to his brother. The Montana property, as Calloway had already told me, was mine. Noelle sat 2 seats away from me at the attorney's table and kept her face carefully neutral the entire time. When it was over, she hugged me at the door, one of those hugs where the arms hold tight, but the body stays pulled back. "Let me know when you're going," she said against my hair. "I want to be there for you." "I'll let you know," I said. I drove to the airport alone. Gil Dorsey was waiting when the car service dropped me at the base of a narrow gravel road in the Flathead Valley. He was in his late 60s, heavy-set, with a grey beard and a flannel shirt. Despite the cold, the kind of man who looks like he was built for the specific landscape he was standing in. He shook my hand without ceremony. "Mrs. Vance," he said, "your husband said you'd come eventually. Glad you finally made it." That last part, finally, knocked something loose in my chest. I didn't let it show. The road wound up through pine forests for almost 2 miles before the cabin appeared. It was bigger than I expected. Not a rustic weekend shack. This was a proper structure. 2 stories, cedar siding, a covered porch running the full length of the front. A generator shed sat to one side. A small equipment barn sat further back. Everything was in clean, maintained condition. The kind of condition that requires ongoing attention. "How long have you been looking after this place?" I asked. "Going on 8 years, Gil said. "Your husband hired me shortly after he upgraded the main structure. Before that, it was just the original 1 room, 8 years of upgrades, and I had never heard a word about it. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and something mineral, like cold stone. The main room was open and spare. Heavy furniture, a stone fireplace, a wall of bookshelves. The desk sat near the window that faced a mountain, and there, on top of a blue journal exactly where Calloway had described, was a white envelope with my name written in Joel's handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I walked through every room first. The kitchen was stocked. The linen closet held folded blankets and spare pillows. The upstairs had 2 bedrooms, both made up. A third room off the main hall was locked. Gil didn't have a key to it. Joel's letter, he told me, had the combination. I came back to the desk and sat down. Joel's handwriting on the envelope was the same as it had always been. Deliberate, slightly tilted, the letters evenly spaced. I used to tease him that his handwriting looked like a font. He used to say that was because he had drawn so many structural labels by hand. I sat there, staring at it for longer than I should have before I finally opened it. Sasha, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've made it to the cabin. I'm sorry I never brought you here. I'm sorry I never explained it. There are things I didn't know how to say while I was alive. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I needed to protect what's in this property before anyone else got to it first. The locked room combination is our wedding anniversary, month, day, year. Gil is the only person I trust here. Listen to him. Do not let Noelle in this property until you've seen what's in the locked room. She already knows the cabin exists. She doesn't know what's in it. Keep it that way until you've spoken to an attorney. I love you. I'm sorry it got complicated. I read it twice. Then I folded it and held it in both hands for a moment. The way you hold something you're not sure you're ready to put down. I went to the locked room and entered the combination. The door swung open. It was a study. A real one. Not a place to sit and read, but a place to work. Filing cabinets along one wall. A large folding table with surveying maps and geological reports spread across it. A laptop closed, a sticky note on top. Password, Merrill 0914. My maiden name and our anniversary. Shelves of 3-ring binders labelled by year. A corkboard on the far wall covered in photographs, maps, printouts of emails, and notes in Joel's handwriting connected by pieces of string. I stood in the doorway for a solid 30 seconds before I could make myself step inside. Gil appeared behind me. He exhaled slowly when he saw the room. He told me you'd find this, he said. He said to give you time before I explained anything. How much time do I need? Less than you think, he said. You strike me as someone who moves fast once she decides to move. I crossed to the corkboard. The photographs were mostly of property surveys, aerial shots, land parcels, but several showed Noelle at a restaurant with a man I didn't recognize. Noelle at what appeared to be a notary office. A printout of an email from Noelle to someone named Douglas Fitch, vice president at a land development company called Summit Range Holdings. The email was dated 14 months ago. The cabin sits on 340 acres with direct access to a protected valley corridor. My brother has no idea of its actual value. Once the estate clears, I can deliver the deed within 60 days. Initial payment of $400,000 has been received. Full terms as discussed. I read it 3 times, each time slower than the last. She already sold it, I said out loud, not a question. She sold the promise a bit, Gil said carefully. She doesn't have the deed. She's never been on this property. But she took the money. I turned around. How long have you known about this? Joel showed me, about 4 months before he died. He'd been building this file for almost 2 years. He nodded toward the corkboard. He confronted her last spring. She denied it, said it was a preliminary conversation, nothing legally binding. Joel knew better. He started documenting everything. I looked at the room again. The binders, the maps, the years of careful organization. Joel had been building a case. Quietly, alone, without telling me, the same way he built this whole property, piece by piece, in silence. I didn't feel angry at him for that. I just felt the particular sadness of understanding something too late to tell him you understand. I sat down at the folding table and opened the laptop. Inside the folder labeled for Sasha were dozens of files, deed records, survey reports, correspondence between Joel and a land conservancy group called Flathead Valley Land Trust, which had been in negotiations with him about a conservation easement that would protect the acreage permanently, emails between Joel and Noelle in which she pushed, repeatedly, to be named a co-executor of any estate that included the cabin property. Each time Joel declined, with polite and careful language. And at the bottom of the folder, a video file. Watch this first. I should have known there would be a video. Joel's face appeared on screen. He was sitting at the very desk I was sitting at, in the same room, the corkboard visible behind him. He looked the way he always looked when he was focused on a problem. Still, economical, like he was saving energy for the thinking. Sasha, he said, if you're watching this, the worst has happened, and I'm sorry. I need you to know that everything I did here, I did to protect this. The cabin, the land, you. The property sits on a geological formation that a company called Summit Range wants to develop. The access corridor alone is worth 8 figures to the right developer. Noelle found out about the land's value before I understood what she was doing. She approached investors. She took money. She's been positioned to challenge the estate and claim co-ownership through some legal maneuvering I've been documenting in this room for 2 years. He leaned closer to the camera. Don't let her rush you. Don't let her make you feel like selling is the smart thing or the easy thing. Look at the Flathead Valley Land Trust files. Look at what this land is worth, not developed. And look at what I built here, not just the cabin. Look at all of it before you make any decision. The video ended. I sat with the screen dark for a while. Outside, through the study's single window, the mountains were turning the particular shade of grey that comes right before the light goes gold. I called an attorney that evening. Not Calloway, a different one, recommended by a colleague from my job at the hospital billing office, a woman who worked in estate law and property disputes. Her name was Miss Abernathy. I described the situation in broad terms: husband deceased, property with significant land value, sister-in-law who had taken money from a developer against a deed she didn't own, potential estate challenge. She was quiet for a moment. Do you have documentation of the funds she received? I have emails, a payment confirmation, and 2 years' worth of correspondence my husband compiled. Then you're in a strong position, she said, but we need to move before she does. How soon can you send me the files? Tonight, I said. I was up until 2 in the morning scanning and uploading documents. Gil made coffee and left it on the desk without being asked. At some point he set a plate of toast beside the mug and said nothing, just went back to whatever he'd been doing. I thought about Joel hiring this man 8 years ago, choosing him, trusting him, and I thought that Joel had been a better judge of character than I'd given him credit for. Nell texted me at 9 p.m. Heard you flew out. How's the cabin? I really think we should talk in person before you make any moves. I put the phone face down on the desk and kept scanning. The next morning, Gil showed me the full property. 340 acres of forest, creek and meadow in a protected corridor between 2 national forest boundaries. He pointed out the geological survey markers Joel had commissioned, the same survey that had caught Summit Range's attention in the first place. The rock formation underneath the western meadow sat on a formation of rare aggregate that developers used in high-grade construction materials. It was worth more in the ground, undeveloped, than most residential properties in Illinois. He loved this land, Gil said, when we stood at the edge of the meadow and looked at the mountains. Not in a sentimental way, in a responsible way, like it was something that had been handed to him on loan. He never told me, I said. He was afraid you'd want to sell it, Gil said carefully. Not that you would. He was afraid you'd be tempted if he knew the number, and he didn't trust himself to explain it in a way that wouldn't make you feel like he was keeping it from you. Which, I know that sounds contradictory. It sounds exactly like him, I said. My phone buzzed. Noelle again. I'm going to fly out this weekend. We need to talk face to face. I typed back, this property is under active legal review. Please do not come until you've spoken to my attorney, Ms. Abernathy, directly. She read it immediately. The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, That's not necessary, Sasha. We're family. I put the phone in my jacket pocket and walked back toward the cabin. Miss Abernathy called at noon with news that was both expected and somehow still a shock to hear said out loud. Summit Range Holdings had filed a request with the County Recorder's Office to register a letter of intent on the Pinewood Ridge property, citing an agreement with a family representative of the estate. The representative was named as Noelle Vance. She submitted a document claiming Joel had authorized her as a family trustee, Ms. Abernathy said. The document is notarized. The signature doesn't match the samples I have from the will. I'm filing an objection today, and I'm requesting the county freeze any transfer actions on the property pending the estate challenge. Is the forgery provable? I asked. With the documentation you've sent me, yes. The email chain alone is enough to open a fraud investigation. Add the forged trustee document, and we're looking at potential wire fraud, not just civil misrepresentation. I looked out the window at the tree line. Do it. That afternoon, Gil found a set of tire tracks behind the equipment barn that hadn't been there the previous morning. 2 vehicles, from the tread impressions. The lock on the barn's rear door had been scratched, not broken but worked at. Someone was here, he said, showing me his phone photos. Before sunrise, the front gate was still locked, so they came through the service easement off the forest road. I called Miss Abernathy back and told her, "That's them testing access," she said. "File a trespass report with the Flathead County Sheriff. Today, it documents a pattern." I filed it myself in person at the county sheriff's office in Kalispell. The deputy who took my statement had the specific, unhurried patience of someone who dealt regularly with land disputes in the region. "Summit Range has come up before," he said, without elaborating. "We'll log this and flag any further activity." When I got back to the cabin, Noelle had called 3 times and left 1 voicemail. I played it in the study with the door closed. Her voice was warm, concerned. The particular kind of warm and concern that I had, over 9 years of being her brother's wife, come to understand meant she was working towards something. "Sasha, I'm worried about you being out there alone. This property is a lot to take on. Joel never intended for it to be a burden on you. He told me that. He said if anything happened to him, he'd want me to help guide the process. I've already spoken with the people at Summit Range and they are genuinely good partners. There's a number on the table right now that won't last. I really think we should talk before you let an attorney make this adversarial. This doesn't have to be a fight." I deleted it and opened the Summit Range file Joel had built. Joel had documented every contact Noelle had made with them. Phone records he'd obtained through a private investigator, emails she'd forwarded to investors, a presentation deck she'd sent Summit Range's acquisitions team with property photos and projected development timelines. She had been positioning this for at least 22 months, while Joel was alive, while she was coming to our house for Christmas dinner and asking me what I wanted for my birthday. I sat with that for a while, not because it surprised me, because it didn't. 2 days later, Miss Abernathy called with confirmation that the county had frozen transfer activity and that she had submitted a formal complaint to the Montana Attorney General's office regarding the forged trustee document and the wire transfer from Summit Range. Noelle's attorney had responded with a letter claiming the whole arrangement was a preliminary family discussion and that nothing legally binding had been executed. "Her position is weakening," Ms. Abernathy said. "Summit Range is already distancing themselves from her. They don't want exposure on the fraud. They'll want to negotiate directly with you." "Let them negotiate," I said, "but not on her terms." The following afternoon, I called the director of the Flathead Valley Land Trust. Her name was Carol, practical, direct, the kind of person who answers the phone herself. Joel had been in contact with her for over a year. She already knew his name, knew the property. "We've been hoping someone would call," she said. "We were afraid the estate would go straight to a developer." I told her I wanted to understand all the options before I made any decisions. She talked for an hour. Conservation easements, sustainable use agreements, tax benefits, legacy designations. The land, she explained, functioned as a wildlife corridor connecting 2 pieces of national forest. Developing it would effectively close that corridor. Not developing it, protecting it formally, would make it eligible for federal conservation funding and would generate annual payments to the landowner through a carbon sequestration program. Your husband understood the full picture, she said. He wasn't just protecting his property. He was protecting a system. When I hung up, I walked out onto the front porch and stood there looking at the mountains for a long time. I had been thinking about this place as a problem to solve, something Joel had complicated my grief with. But standing there, watching the light change across the ridge, I started to understand it the way he must have understood it, as something he had been custodian of and was now passing to me. Ms. Abernathy called again that evening. Nella's attorney reached out. She wants to meet. Where? She's proposing her attorney's office in Chicago. Neutral ground. No, I said. If she wants to talk, she can come here, to the property. There was a pause. That's a strong move. She's never seen it, I said. I want her to see it before we negotiate anything. I want her to understand what she was planning to sell. The meeting happened 4 days later. Noelle flew into Kalispell and came up the gravel road in a rental car, her attorney in the passenger seat. She stepped out looking the way she always looked, polished, composed, her expression calibrated for sympathy. But when she turned to look at the property, the cabin, the pines, the ridge visible above the tree line, something shifted in her face. I met her on the porch. We did not hug. Her attorney was a compact man with wire-rimmed glasses, who carried a briefcase and kept his expression professionally blank. I had Miss Abernathy on a video call on the tablet propped on the kitchen table. Gil stayed outside, visible through the window, moving slowly along the tree line the way a person does when they want to be seen without appearing to watch. We sat across from each other at the table. Noelle opened with the version of events she'd apparently decided to commit to, that Joel had verbally authorized her to explore options for the property, that the arrangement with Summit Range was always intended to be a family decision, that the $400,000 she'd received was refundable holding deposit and had never been spent. I let her finish. Then I opened the folder in front of me and slid the first document across the table, the email to Douglas Fitch. My brother has no idea of its actual value. Once the estate clears, I can deliver the deed within 60 days. She looked at it. Her expression didn't break exactly, it compressed. That was taken out of context, she said. I slid the second document. The forged trustee authorization. This is your signature on a document claiming Joel designated you as trustee. It doesn't match the signature samples from his verified documents. Flathead County has it. The Attorney General's office has it. Her attorney leaned toward her and said something quietly. She shook her head once, a sharp little motion. I slid the third document. The payment confirmation from Summit Range. $400,000 deposited to an LLC in your name on March 14th. The LLC was formed 6 days earlier. The room was quiet except for the sound of the wind against the windows and the faint hum of the video call. Noelle looked at me then, not at the documents. Joel kept everything from you, she said. He kept this whole place from you, she said. He kept this whole place from you. And you're going to sit here and defend him? I'm not defending him, I said. I'm defending what he built. Her attorney placed his hand on her arm. This time she let him speak. He said quietly that his client was open to discussing a resolution. Ms. Abernathy spoke from the tablet. Our terms are straightforward. Noelle Vance returns the $400,000 to Summit Range Holdings directly, voiding any existing informal agreement. She signs a statement confirming she had no legal authority to represent the estate. She issues a retraction to any parties she represented herself to as a trustee or family representative. In exchange, we will not pursue civil damages. And the criminal referral? The attorney asked. Remains with the Attorney General's office, Ms. Abernathy said. That's not in our control. Another silence. Noelle was looking at the window now, at the mountain visible beyond the glass. I watched her face and thought about 9 years of Christmas dinners and birthday cards and the way she used to call Joel every Sunday evening. Fine, she said quietly. Her attorney began pulling papers from his briefcase. She signed each one with the practiced ease of someone who had signed a lot of things in her life, and I watched her hand move across the pages and felt nothing that I would describe as victory, just the particular tiredness of something that needed to be finished finally being finished. When they left, I stood on the porch again and listened to the rental car crunch back down the gravel road until the sound disappeared into the pines. Gil came up beside me. "How'd it go?" "It's done," I said. He nodded once, the way he did when something confirmed what he'd already expected. "Your husband would be relieved." I thought about Joel building this case for 2 years in this room alone. I thought about the folder labeled for Sasha and the video he'd recorded sitting at that desk. I thought about the letter he'd left in the blue journal. I'm sorry it got complicated, and how, even at the end, his instinct had been to apologize for the difficulty before explaining the reason. "He was a careful person," I said. "He was," Gil said. "Sometimes careful people are hard to live with, but they leave things in better shape than they found them." I called Carol at the Land Trust that evening and told her I was ready to talk seriously about a conservation easement. She asked how long I planned to stay at the property. "I haven't decided yet," I said. And for the first time since the attorney had called me to say my husband's name and the word Montana in the same sentence, that felt like an honest answer rather than a deflection. The agreement with Flathead Valley Land Trust took 6 weeks to finalize. Miss Abernathy and Carol's legal team worked through the details together: the boundaries of the protected acreage, the terms of sustainable use, the federal conservation designation that would take effect once the easement was recorded. The carbon sequestration payments weren't enormous, but they were consistent, and the conservation designation came with a tax benefit that Ms. Abernathy said would have made Joel quietly satisfied. Summit Range Holdings sent a formal letter withdrawing all claims on the property. Douglas Fitch's name did not appear on the letterhead. I filed it with the county recorder and sent a copy to the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General opened a formal investigation into Noelle. I didn't follow it closely. That was her problem to navigate now, with her own attorney and her own resources. I had made a decision somewhere in the middle of all of it to stop tracking what happened to her and pay attention to what was happening here instead. What was happening here was this: Gil had been maintaining the cabin alone for 8 years, and there were a dozen small repairs and improvements that had been quietly waiting for someone to make a decision about them. I started making decisions: a new roof on the equipment barn, proper insulation in the locked study, which I had begun thinking of simply as the workroom, a second generator for backup power. I started spending more time in the workroom going through Joel's files, not the legal ones, but the earlier ones, the survey reports he'd commissioned in the first years of ownership, the notes he'd kept on the wildlife activity he'd observed from the porch. A binder labelled Flathead, What I Know, that turned out to be part field journal, part property history, written in his careful handwriting across 140 pages. I had not known he kept journals. That surprised me more than the cabin had. I read the whole binder over 3 evenings, sitting at his desk with the mountain visible through the study window. He wrote about the land the way he wrote about structures, with attention to load-bearing elements, to what held weight and what didn't, to the relationship between visible surfaces and hidden foundations. He wrote about why he had never told me, in a passage near the middle, that I have read several times since. "I keep meaning to bring Sasha here. Every season I think this is the one, but the longer I wait, the more it becomes a place that is mine alone, and I know that's selfish. I know it. But I'm not ready to share it yet. Not because I don't trust her. Because I don't trust myself to explain what it means to me. And once I explain it, it will change. Things change when you put them into words. I understood that. I didn't agree with all of it, but I understood it. I drove down to Kalispell one afternoon and bought a journal of my own. Not to record anything in particular, just because it seemed like the right kind of tool to have in a workroom. The day I signed the final conservation easement papers, Gil opened a bottle of beer he'd apparently been saving in the back of the cabin refrigerator for an unspecified occasion. He handed one to me without ceremony, and we sat on the front porch in the late afternoon light. "What happens now?" he asked. "We keep going," I said. He seemed to find that sufficient. The mountains were turning gold at the edges the way they did every evening at this hour, and the light came through the pines in long angles across the porch boards. I thought about Joel sitting here, in this same chair, with the same view, alone with whatever he was working through. I thought about how he'd spent 11 years protecting something he didn't know how to explain, and how the protection had held even after he was gone. I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do with the cabin long term, whether I would spend seasons here, or hire additional help, or formalize a partnership with the land trust for educational programs the way Carol had suggested. Those were decisions that didn't need to be made tonight. What I knew tonight was that the property was protected, the fraud had been answered, the land was intact, and somewhere in the workroom behind the corkboard that I had taken down and replaced with a clean map, there was a journal with 140 pages of my husband's handwriting that I was only halfway through. It was enough to know that. It was more than enough to start. I've thought a lot about what Joel's silence actually cost him. Not what it cost me, I've made my peace with that part, but what it cost him personally, carrying something that large for that long without being able to share it. He built something real in those Montana mountains, something careful and considered and worth protecting. And he carried the full weight of it alone for 11 years because he didn't trust himself to explain it in a way that would land right. That's not a character flaw exactly, but it is a kind of loneliness that didn't have to exist. I think about that when people ask me if I'm angry at him, and the honest answer is, not really. What I feel is closer to a complicated tenderness. He was trying to protect something he loved, the land, the project, and me, and he just ran out of time before he figured out how to do all three at once. What I am less generous about is Noelle. Not because she was greedy, though she was, but because she made a choice to look at her brother's life and see an asset to extract rather than a person to stand beside. She had years to be honest, with Joel, with me, with herself, and at every point where honesty was available to her, she chose a different door. That's the kind of decision that doesn't just affect one transaction, it shapes who you become. By the time she sat across from me at that table and signed those papers, she wasn't just losing the property. She was the person who had spent 2 years forging documents and lying to investors while coming to our house for the holidays. You don't just walk that back. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it because I think it's the part of this story that actually matters, beyond the legal filings and the property lines. There's a version of how this could have gone where I flew out to Montana, got overwhelmed by the paperwork, let Noelle's "I just want to help" routine wear me down, and signed something I shouldn't have signed. I know that version existed. She was counting on it. What stopped it wasn't anything dramatic. It was just that I kept moving when I wanted to stop, kept reading when I wanted to close the folder, kept making one more call when I wanted to hand the whole thing to someone else. That's not heroism. That's just not quitting on a Tuesday when it would have been very easy to quit. Gil told me once near the end of everything that Joel used to say the land had a way of surviving people who didn't deserve it. I've been thinking about that ever since. There's something true in it that has nothing to do with any specific piece of ground. The things worth protecting, the things that actually last, tend to survive because someone decided, at some ordinary moment when no one was watching, to do the harder thing instead of the easier one. Joel did that for 11 years in a workroom in Montana that I didn't know existed. I'm trying to do it now, one decision at a time, with the journal he left on the desk and the mountains outside the window. That's all any of it ever really is. Someone deciding it matters. Someone refusing to look away.